Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our eye dissection. In class, we're going to do a cow eye, but I wanted you to take a look at a human eye. Our anatomage table allows us to do that. So this is the human eye. You're going to notice a couple differences with the cow eye and a human eye. One of the things is it's going to be larger. The other thing that you can see here on our anatomage table is that you have more muscles. On the cow eye, you're going to have 4 muscles. This is our superior. This is going to contract to move the eye up and down with the inferior muscle down here. And then you have 2 muscles on the side. However, humans have oblique muscles that allow for our heads to not have to move every time we move our eye like cows do. So these oblique muscles here are going to allow for that movement a little bit smoother, and we're going to be able to move our eyes without moving our head. A couple structures that we want to talk about before we get into the eye dissection is the cornea. The cornea is the outside piece of the eye. As I like to tell my students, if you think about it as a car, it's kind of the windshield. It's protective. It keeps everything inside intact. Out here is the sclera. This is the white part of the eye. Now on the cow dissection, it's not really going to be white because it's been in formalin for a while, so it's not really going to be white, but we all kind of know that that's the white part of the eye. In here, inside of it, if I can remove that piece, that's going to show me this area here. This is a muscular piece called the iris. And in the human, this is going to be the colored piece. And it has a muscle, so it's going to allow for it to open up if there's not enough light, or close down if there's too much light. And this area in here is the pupil. And the pupil is just the hole where it goes through and allows light to go all the way through and to hit the back of the retina where it's going to create an image. There's a lens on the other side of that pupil there, and that's going to allow for accommodation. It's going to flatten out, or it's going to round out in order to accommodate and make sure that the image is focused on the back of the eye. One thing is, here's the cornea. Between the cornea and this iris, there is a fluid called the aqueous humor. And the aqueous humor is just a fluid that allows for all of this to stay intact. It has some nutrients in it as well. Let's take a look at the side here. You can see the optic nerve out of the back of this eyeball. I'm going to kind of rotate it here for you. But you can see the optic nerve coming out of the back of the eyeball on this. And that's where it's going to go to the occipital lobe of the brain, where the images are going to be processed. Again, these are muscles on the side. I'm going to go ahead and make a cut for you so that we can take a look at it, and then we'll go from there. So as I remove the sclera, you can see that white part of the eye comes out. This is the choroid here, and I'm going to go ahead and remove it. But over on the side here, you can kind of see that muscular piece of the iris here. I'm going to move it over so you can see a little bit better. But you can see how it starts here, and then it kind of is back in this area here as well. I'm going to get rid of that. Here's my retina. This is the part that has your rods and cones. So it's going to take all of that information as it comes through that cornea, through the aqueous humor, through the pupil, through that lens that's going to accommodate it, and it's going to come back and hit the back of this eyeball, and the back of the eyeball is going to take that with its rods and cones and create an image from the light. And so what we do need to know is if that lens is not accommodating correctly, then the image can be projected on it either too far back or too far forward, causing you to have issues and blurry vision. Inside here is that vitreous body or vitreous humor that we talk about. This is a jelly-like substance. It's made of protein and water, and this is clear as well, and it helps as to keep the structure of the eye. It keeps the retina in place so there's no folding of that retina, because if that happens, you're going to have vision issues as well. And it takes all of that information from the retina that you can see down here into this optic nerve, back out into the occipital lobe where it's processed. So these are the structures of the human eye. Let's go take a look at the cow eye and do a dissection so that we can compare the two.
Getting hyped up for this eye dissection. The eye of the bovine. You know it's a bovine, right? They don't have the eye of the bovine song. So I think I should redo that. Jasmine, you're right. I'm TikToking it. All right. Okay. So as we do this, let me make sure that I have this presenting the way that I want it. Boom, boom. A little hype music, Eye of the Tiger for our dissection. All right. Here we are together again. All right. So like I said earlier, have your document out. I'm going to make sure that we're all on the same page. If you did not get functions already and you need to fill in some, I'm going to go over some of the functions of these. So don't stress out. Don't go crazy. We're going to make it all happen. We're going to all finish together. Okay. So a couple things before we get started. You are going to label. I'm going to show you how to do that on one of the first things. But before we get moving on, this is my cow eye. All right. Check that guy out. All right. This is different than a human eye, not only because it's larger, but it has a couple other different things going on as far as structures are concerned. So in a cow eye, they have 4 muscles. One that makes it go up, down, left, and right. So with that said, ours, we have 2 more oblique muscles. So a lot of times cows have their eyes on the side of their head. So you'll see them kind of move their head. You like what I said, move their head. They move their head instead of their eyes more than we do. We actually use our oblique muscles. We have 2 oblique muscles that allow for us to keep our head in one spot and move it around. And we are also binocular, which means that both of our eyes face forward. It gives us this 3D images that we see. So we have a little bit more control of our eyeball, but because we're more of a predator than a prey. Ours, we don't have the eyes on the side of our head. They're actually in front. Okay, so that gives us our 3D information. So what you'll see here, you'll see there's a lot of stuff kind of back here, and you can kind of move it around. This stuff back here, this is the muscle I was talking about. There's also fat. And so that fat acts like a good cushioning for the eyeball. All right. Now, before we move on, you can kind of see, should I zoom in a little bit here? I'm gonna have to wipe down this camera once I'm done. Let's do that. How's that? All right, good. So what we see here is the first structure that we are going to identify is the cornea. All right, and you can see that in this, it's a little wrinkled, the cornea itself. I'm guessing that the aqueous humor probably is no longer intact as much as it should be, so it doesn't have the shape that it normally would. When we think of the cornea right here, it's kind of like a window, or if you think of your car windshield, it's kind of the same way, right? It has this protective piece over the top of it. Remember that we read the article that talks about how light will refract as it comes in. That's the cornea that helps with that refraction or the bending of the light. It's also a protective area. So you want to make sure that this is well taken care of. If you have issues with this being scratched or any of those things, it could really cause issues with your vision, and there's not a lot that you can do about it. So very important to take care of this cornea on the anterior surface of the eyeball. So let's take a look at the cornea. I'm going to pull this off. It is pretty tough, even with this really sharp new scalpel. And behind that is the aqueous humor, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But let me see if I can kind of cut this off so I can show it to you. And like I said, if we were in class, you guys would be doing this. But I'm going to take this and go really superficial. You can see some of that. See that come out? Some of that fluid. That is aqueous humor. And aqueous humor is in the anterior chamber of the eye. This actually has a whole bunch of aqueous humor. And so I'm going to be careful here just so it can kind of run out. I don't want to cut my fingers either, so take it really nice and slow. Okay. So this is, like I said, it's larger because it's a cow eyeball. We do sheep sometimes, but I happen to get some cow eyeballs because I thought they were kind of cooler. You guys saw, if you're on our Instagram, you saw that we got some pig heads that were delivered the other day by the butcher. I was going to try and use those eyeballs, but they're extremely difficult to get out, but they also are small. And this one was a lot bigger, so I thought this might be better. The thing about doing a live one is you can see this cornea is kind of cloudy. It clouds over. with alive, or the ones that were just alive, because those pig heads came from pigs that were just slaughtered that morning, it wouldn't have this cloudy appearance as much, right? So this is a protective piece. It's very, very tough. You can see that as I pull it or tried to cut it, it was very difficult to kind of go through. And I can poke at it and nothing's going to go through it. I can use this. You can kind of hear it crunchy a little bit there. But this is the protective piece. And this is important because all of the stuff behind it is pretty delicate. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to label is we're going to label the cornea on your document. So let's go back. I took off my glove. So let's go back to here. Okay. And on this document, I already have mine labeled. I'm going to show you how I did that. So you click here. I'm going to take these off because I didn't start a new copy. But I'm going to show you how to do that. You guys should know how to do this because we did this in the other dissection. But here are my 4 parts of the eye. Some of the things are a little more difficult to see, but we'll go through. What I want to make sure you know is that you're going to use whatever picture you think has the best representation of that structure that we're looking for. Okay, so for instance, here's my cornea. So I'm going to double click on this. It's a Google Draw. I'm going to take an arrow and I'm going to put it to the cornea. If I want to, I can increase the size of that arrow, and I can also type in here by inserting a text box. Okay, and I can move this guy around however I want. I want him to go here, cornea. Come on. I can rotate them. There's all kinds of stuff I can do with them depending on what I want it to look like. Okay, so here's the cornea. I'm going to save it. Now, remember, we had issues before with these saving the correct way. So you want to make sure that you are saving those as JPEGs and inserting them later. Somebody said if you do it as a docx, you download it as a docx and then turn it in that way, that it's good. I don't know. You guys have to tell me. But I know that if you just do it this way, sometimes there's issues with it going away. All right. So with that said, we're going to move on to the next component of the eye. Now, the one thing that I need you guys to label is the aqueous humor. And in this, you're not really going to have an opportunity to see the aqueous humor. I mean, we can see some remnants of it here. You can see that there's some fluid in there. Aqueous, like aqua, like water, right? There's this really watery substance in the anterior portion of the eye, and that's called aqueous humor. You're going to label this on the pictures I gave you, but really you're going to label where it is. You're not going to label the water itself because there's not really a way to do that. So it's right on the underside or the other side of this cornea. So if I had the cornea here again, underneath that would be the aqueous humor, and it would fill this chamber here with that substance. Okay, there's also another liquid, quote unquote, liquid piece in this, in the posterior chamber, and we're going to talk about that when we get there. Okay, so cornea should be labeled, so should your aqueous humor. All right, here we go. So the next part that you are going to identify is the sclera, and the sclera is the white part of the eye. Now, again, this has been sitting in formalin forever, so you can't really see it. But this is the white part of the eye. When you look at a human, they have that white part of the eye. That's called the sclera. So you're going to label that as the sclera. And that sclera is kind of where I cut when I pulled off that lens. It was a little bit easier to get in that area than it was around the lens. I'm sorry, the cornea. Okay, so cornea attaches here to the sclera. Okay. Right, so the next part we're going to talk about is the pupil. And again, kind of like the aqueous humor, you can't really label it too well because you're just going to label where it is. You're not really going to see the aqueous humor there. But the pupil is kind of the same way. You can see that there's a hole here, right? And that hole that you see is the pupil. And that pupil allows light to go in and the image to be projected on the back of the retina. And so it goes through all of these structures as it does that. We're going to talk about the lens and the vitreous humor. But this hole here, that is the pupil. Now, this area here is the iris. Okay. In a human, the iris would be the colored portion. So is it blue? Is it green? Is it brown, right? That is the iris area. And the iris is what becomes larger to let more light in, or smaller when you're in lots of light to let less light in. And so this is kind of monitors the amount of light that comes in. And so it has these muscles that pull on it, right? These ciliary muscles that pull on it so that it can open and close or monitor or regulate light. As we walk into a dark room or into a light room, you're going to see this pupil start to get larger and bigger. One of the things that larger and smaller. One of the things that I want you guys to recognize is that when we did concussions, this was one of the things that we were going to test. We were going to see, can it go through the process of becoming smaller or bigger depending on the amount of light that comes in, right? So it allows light into the posterior chamber of the eye. And then the iris is that, again, colored part that we talked about, and it regulates the amount of light that comes in. Now, we've all been in a dark room and been in a room that has lots of light. In a dark room, you're going to have the rods and cones are going to start to kind of take over, right? In a dark room, you're going to see more black and white, more shadows. That's because your eye would rather take the image at very low detail than have no image at all. And so when you have colored vision, normally it's because you're in an area that's brightly lit and those cones can start to take over. Okay, so again, pupil in the middle here, that's the hole there. And then this is the iris here. Okay, give you a second. Now, from here, we can kind of see the next part. This is the lens. And I'm going to kind of cut into this and spread it out into, or separate them out into anterior and posterior regions. But you can see the lens in here. And this is going to be important when we're talking about accommodation. And we'll get a chance to see that once I pull it out here. But I'm going to let you guys fill in the parts that you haven't filled in yet. But as I do that, I'm going to kind of clean this up a little bit as you do that to give you a little work time. And at the same time, I get some work time. And I'm going to cut this eye into anterior and posterior portions. Okay. And I'm just going to clean it up just so it's a little bit easier to manage. And I'm going to take that and put it over to the side. Oop, I got a little too much of a cut. Okay. And now that I have this kind of separated out a little bit, I'm going to cut around the equator here. Here's the eyeball, okay, where we were. And I'm going to just cut around it so I can separate this front part, the anterior part, from the posterior portion. So I'm going to take this nice and slow so I make sure I get a good cut. You want to make sure not to go too deep because you will destroy all the structures in the eye. A little crunchy there. Remember, these have been in a bucket or in some type of chemical for a while. And in an effort not to lose my finger and to stay out of your way, I'm going to go slow. And there you go. Okay. Now they are separated. And I'm going to try and lay this back down because I need that structure in there. Okay. I'm going to set it to the side. Don't really need that at this point. So what you're going to see in here is this is the vitreous humor. That's one of the things that you have to label. You can see that there's some of this tissue in here, and we'll talk about what that is. But this vitreous humor is not like the aqueous humor in that it's a jelly-like substance. It's still transparent. It's still see-through because the light has to go through it, right, to get to the retina. So it's in there as it gives the eye its shape. It's made of protein and water. So that's important to know. But this is important so that the image can be shined on the back of that retina and to give the eye its shape. All right, so what I'm going to do while you guys are labeling the vitreous humor on your dock, I'm going to try and break up a little bit of this vitreous and pull it out. Okay, and you can see it is jelly-like. I didn't lie about that. I see some comments about it being jelly-like. I'm going to try and keep this lens intact as much as possible for right now. Okay, see if I can kind of dump out a little bit of that. There we go. Okay, so now we're looking at the posterior chamber, right? So this part right here is the lens. Okay, so when I turn it around like this, here's the pupil, light goes through, this is the lens, and I'm going to pop the lens out. And you can see the hole there. That's the pupil with the iris, right? And this is the lens. Now the lens is super important because what it does is it will flatten out or it will round in order to accommodate. So if you're looking at something far or you're looking at something close, this accommodates. It changes shape to make sure that the image that you're seeing is focused on the back of the eye where the retina is. And we'll talk about the retina here in a second. The other thing I want to point out to you is this vitreous humor, because it's in there and gives its eye its shape, is it keeps the retina kind of in place. It's flush on the back of the eye. If it's wrinkled, if there's any kind of folding, then it can cause issues with vision. Okay, I'm trying to get that to the right place there. So if this was a fresh eye, you would be able to see through this, but it's kind of cloudy. You would be able to see through it and you would be able to see that it was a magnifier. It actually magnifies things underneath it, but this is also the way that our eye accommodates, using muscles to flatten out and to round out so that we can focus the image on the back of our eye. The thing about the lens is right here, it's kind of hard on the outside, okay? It's hard like that normally, but not this hard. And it's soft in the inside that allows for it to be moved around quite a bit. Now, this is kind of like an onion. It has layers, and those layers, you grow new layers every year. So it does grow. It's not just a stagnant piece. It actually grows over time and replaces old layers. Okay? And so that is the lens. I'm going to set this to the side. Now let's take a look at the retina. I'm going to take the anterior portion here and just kind of give you some more reference. So when we're looking at the eye again, it was like this, right? There's the front of it. There's the back. So when I pull it off, this is the back part. This portion here, this tissue here that's kind of really delicate, that is the retina. That's where your rods and cones are. So that's where you have color vision, and that's where the processing of this light takes place. So the light comes through, hits that retina, and that retina then takes that light information, takes it down the optic nerve to the brain, to the occipital lobe, where it is processed and we see images. Okay, so this is the retina here. So it receives light that it has to focus, and it converts that light into an image and into neural signals. Okay. Now, when I'm doing this, you can see it's pretty easy to move around. However, there is one spot. If I take it and gather it, you can kind of see that it's attached there at one spot. That one spot where it's attached is called the blind spot. And if you were in class, we would have had an opportunity to do a blind spot test in our activity. It's one of the lab stations. However, it was really difficult to do at home, so I took it out. But there is a blind spot in the eye where all of that retina comes together and gathers. So you can label that. This is a little bit more difficult to label on your document. I didn't really have a good place to put that. However, I would say right in here, we can see it kind of attaches. I would say that I would put my blind spot somewhere like right in here, down on the bottom. Okay. Now, as you do that, let's take a look to where that goes. I have all of this neural information that's being taken up by the retina, and that retina, where it attaches in, if I can kind of just get this to kind of come off, let's see if I can scratch it off a little bit. Right here, this becomes the optic nerve. I'm going to show you up here, sorry. Okay, so right here where I pulled this off, that becomes the optic nerve. And the optic nerve is on the very back. You can see where it comes out the back of the eye. So it gathers all this information, sends it down that nerve, remember the nerve of this optic nerve, this piece of optic nerve, there it is. Okay, if I separate this out a tiny bit there, you guys see that piece right there? That's my optic nerve. And that optic nerve will run from this eyeball all the way back to the posterior part of the brain into the occipital lobe. Right? So this is the optic nerve, and that white color that you see, that's from the myelin. Remember the myelin sheath that we talked about? This is the myelinated portion, and so that's why it has a white color. And it takes those light images to the brain where it processes and becomes images. Okay, and lastly, for this eye dissection, you'll notice in the inside this really like kind of beautiful color in here. It looks like an abalone shell. If you've ever gone to like a fish market or you've gone to the beach and found shells, they have the same type of color type of thing to it. This is what we call the tapetum. Now, this portion I want to point out is not in a human eye. Okay, this is in cows. This is in cats. If you've ever seen a cat at night and you shine a light at it and it looks like their eyes glow, that's because the light is bouncing off the back of this to the tapetum, the back of the eye, and it's being reflected back. Humans have a portion like this, but it's all black because we want to absorb the light. So this is found in cats and cows, but it's not found in humans. So that's your tapetum there. Okay. Now, as we've gone through, you should have been able to identify all of these structures. You should have functions. I went over the functions as well. You did a little research earlier. Now what I want you to do is, now that you have this completely filled out with these are your labeled pictures. Like before, I have a spot where you're going to do study pictures. So this is where your study guide comes in. So when I go to here, you can see that I labeled this A. So I went up to my chart, and on the chart, I put letters for everything. So A is my cornea, B is my aqueous humor, C is my sclera, D is my pupil, right? So on here, I just know that this is my cornea. So I went down to my study guide and I said, okay, on the chart, it's labeled A. I'm going to, same thing, I'm going to show you how to do this. Right? So I'm going to grab an arrow, and I know that this is my cornea, but I want to make sure I have a study guide. So I'm going to put a text box in here, and I'm going to label it A. And save it. And I'm going to have all of these labeled A through K on this study guide portion. So I'll have an actual picture labeled. Everything has a label on it. And then I'll have study guide pictures with just letters that I can go back and use as a study guide. Okay. Now, last part, now that we know the structures, now we're going to look at how the eye actually works. How does it use light to see images? So in class, we have a Pascal eye model. Normally, if you were here, I'd have 16 of these out. I'd have 2 of you guys per station, and you would be going through this activity. However, not really able to do that in the situation we're in. So I made a video. It's about 7 minutes. It's linked here. Right? So 7:22 with an intro and an exit. So you're going to watch this, and you're going to answer these questions as you move through. Now, they are in order. I made sure they were in order. But one thing I do want to point out is that on number 10 here, it says, note, convex lenses are marked with a positive, and the convex are marked with a negative. So on here, you'll see that on 15 as well. So make sure that you note that as you watch the video. And on the video, it will have +400 or -307.